So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to introduce you to our guest speaker tonight, Celes Davar. He has a very interesting combination of skills. He is a biologist, a photographer, and a walker. He's passionate about connecting people in his community to those who wish to learn about local culture, art, live music, and food. He's a foodie who loves preparing food, learning about food culture, and introducing guests to local foods. He's also a lover. You may have read our profile of him on Solo Traveler. He's also a lover of live roots and folk music, and he believes that our songwriters today are some of our best contemporary poets. He's a guide, a choreographer, and a storyteller. He's trained as a biologist and an international climate change presenter. He's dedicated to coaching and helping local people share stories about their life, culture, and what they love doing as their life work. And he works throughout Canada, helping people in their communities express their traditions as stories and interactive experiences for travelers. So welcome, Celes. We're so happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a delight to be here with everyone.
Great. I think we'll just dive right in. I have a general idea of what experiential travel is, but could you describe it for us and maybe offer a few sort of concrete examples?
Sure, and bear with me. I may refer to a few notes just as triggers for things. But first of all, I guess what I want to share is that part of my thoughts around experiential tourism and the things that we call experiences in tourism and travel come both by being an operator, but also by helping businesses across the country to be able to take the stories that are in their backyard and offer them as experiences. So I come from it from both perspectives. A few things that differentiate an experience. First of all, at the heart of it is a local facilitator, storyteller, or guide, someone who is knowledgeable about the local countryside. And I often ask the question when I'm working across Canada, what is the DNA of this place? And I ask that question to people who are chefs. I ask that question of travelers as well too. What do you think the DNA is, this place that you've come to? And it's a stumping question because for a moment, we're sort of trying to understand this concept of genetics and DNA, but DNA of place, what is that? And so to some extent, that's a really good entrance into what experiences are. What's really important for me is that the guide or storyteller is paid a living wage. It's really critical. And that living wage is a means to an end. That is, the story has value. And so while we seem to value people who have a university education, we often haven't sort of asked ourselves, should a farmer be paid a good wage for telling their story and sharing what they've learned after 30 years of farming in a particular area, or a woodworker or somebody like that? One of the tricks to an experience that differentiates it from a tour, and there's several different words that we often find that people are puzzling over. Is it a tour? Is it a demonstration? Is it a retreat? Is it a gathering? No, it's an experience. And part of the reason it's an experience is that we are inviting the experienced partner, be they a chef, a musician, a songwriter, a guide, an artist, a potter, like my wife, to step to the side and actually enable our guests to learn for themselves. So as opposed to staying at the front of the tour bus or at the front of a walk or along a trail, talking at people, part of this is about the magic of entering the world of the facilitator and guide, which means that the experience cannot be in a hotel room unless maybe it's a songwriting experience. Why? Because we're trying to connect with people who live on the land. We're trying to connect with people who are real in our community. And so there's this sense of harmonizing the experience with the place that the experience partner calls home. That harmonizing is really critical. Another aspect of an experience is the invitation is there to be highly participative. So that means that travelers are choosing to actually sign up for an experience because to some extent, the marketing materials or whatever is there has indicated they're going to do something. Well, the key element of an experience that you do is you actually make something with a maker or a songwriter, and you take it away with you. So there is that promise that is inherent in creating an experience. For me, experiences are about slowing down. It is slow travel. And so part of what we are doing is trying to create and choreograph experiences so that there are moments of both reflection, doing, but for the traveler to actually interact and ask their own questions of their facilitator or their guide. One of the things that I would say that I've learned after 25 years of doing experiential tourism or travel is that the bottom line of an experience is that people are transformed. They don't just go away with new knowledge. Something happens in the experience that touches them personally. And it touches them at a level of emotion and psyche that causes them to reevaluate something. Maybe something they know, maybe a bias that they have, maybe a lack of knowledge about, in the contemporary context in Canada, about reconciliation, history, any number of things. And so transformation becomes part of that. It's a commercial offering. So there's money to be made by the experience partner, and there's money to be paid by the traveler, by the guest. And so it's very much about a commercial offering. I find that it works well in small groups. And that's kind of an antithesis to the mass tourism model. It's kind of an antithesis to the entertainment model, to the arena model. So it's a different choice for people who are wanting a different kind of travel encounter, I might say. One of the things that has been really fun is that I have found that the realm of experience development is also the realm of personalization or customization. That is, we ask different questions. We don't sort of have the package there. We actually begin asking our guests, and I've been doing this for 25 years, whether they be corporate travelers, whether they be group travelers, or whether they be leisure travelers. So what do you want? What do you want to do that's something that, if you're going to come here, you'd love to do? And that's a moment of putting the traveler into the driver's seat, which is not the usual thing in tourism travel. Here's what we have to offer. Here's the price point. Here's when it's scheduled. This is when you can do it. Imagine unpackaging that and what that kind of unpackaging lends itself to in terms of the opportunities that are there. And I guess the last thing I would say is that experiences tend to command a higher price point. And it's not meant to be a higher price point, but because of the attention to detail that goes into it and the logistics and the value that is in the experience, you get to think about it differently. And people are very intentional when they choose to do something. So those are some of the thoughts that come to mind, Tracy, when you ask that question.
So it's a much deeper experience than your usual vacation.
It is. And so part of what becomes challenging is, if it is deeper, how do you communicate that? And how do you make that something that people are going to say, that's for me, right? As opposed to a broad menu in a restaurant, which has the usual kind of stuff on it, all of a sudden the menu is tightened up. And inside that menu, there are things that now begin to resonate with certain travelers. So experiential travel, I would say, is not for everyone.
Right. When I was doing a little bit of research in preparation for tonight, and I was kind of, Googling experiential travel and, sort of seeing like what actually comes up when you are looking for that. And it seemed to me that there was a pretty broad range of different types of experiences, but also that you mentioned that, of course, there's a cost attached, but it also seemed to me that there were experiences that were available for a broad range of budgets. I mean, you could go very luxury, but that also there would be things that I could afford.
That anybody could afford, right? And I think that would be true. That would be that experiences run a full gamut from things that are very accessible, both in terms of time and effort, and they don't have a lot of logistics involved with them, so they're very affordable. I can give you a couple of examples of that, and I just want to take you to a place where I've been working recently. In Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan. And we've coached a number of new experiences there. And I wanted to share what their landing page might look like. So if any of your guests or your viewers are looking at this and sort of saying, what would that look like? Here's what it looks like. This is their landing page for their website. So you see Tourism Saskatoon, and all of a sudden you begin to see your Saskatoon experience awaits. Now it really delivers on the word experience. There's a lot of experience watching going on as well. But if you look at these are brand new experiences. A paddling adventure on the South Saskatchewan River, a distillery experience, a really edgy, lovely program in a conservation area called Naughty by Nature, about the sex life of animals in the conservation area. Rooted, a food, drink, and community adventure. So this is a walking adventure. You visit an Indigenous garden, and then you come back through a brewery, side door entry to a brewery, and you end up at the caterer's kitchen to actually have a meal on the deck, and a whiskey experience. So this is the kind of change that is beginning to occur in the traditional destination marketing landing pages where any of us might go in Nova Scotia or in Alberta or Tourism Saskatoon, or even a county in Southern Ontario. So that's the change that you're beginning to see. And if you went to any of those, what you begin to realize is the price point actually begins to change, in answer to your question. So if you go to a different website where we've been working in Southern Ontario, Oxford County, which is west of Toronto, where you folks are, you'll see here that Oxford County has a number of what are called tours and experiences. And this is their landing page. These are truly experiences. So there's an outdoor experience on the Grand River. There's a coffee experience with a coffee shop, a retailer. There's a fresh blooms, cut your own flowers experience with a local florist. There's a chef's table. And then there's a really cool experience called From Tree to Table. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to play a 2-minute video from Tree to Table so that you can get a sense of what he thinks about his experience. That's on his website when you go to book his program. I should go back just for a second to, in answer to your question again, which is, price points, where do they, all of these have varied price points. So if you go to Fresh Blooms and you sort of look at Fresh Blooms, what's the price point on that? And you go down to, it's $40 a person. So it's something that's very affordable in terms of what you can do. Cutting your own blooms, it's from June to October. You register in advance. And so you've got a whole number of these kinds of experiences. On the other hand, if you go to Tree to Table, this is a very personalized experience. It's about 5 hours, and you leave Hamilton or Ancaster or wherever you happen to be, and you travel to a farm community in Tillsonburg. And so I'm just going to play this for you to give you a sense of what Dave would say his experience is. So Dave is a woodworker. He makes charcuterie boards. That's what he does. And so when he makes a charcuterie board, that's a retail item. And he had never thought about, as a woodworker, sharing his story as an experience. And that's what we're starting to do across Canada, is realize that these stories actually are not people who are traditionally in tourism, but they live in our community and they can actually deliver an experience. So let me play this for you. And just give me a thumbs up if you can hear the audio on this.
Otter Creek Woodworks is a woodworking company. We focus on artisanally made charcuterie boards. The charcuterie board is a canvas for the food that you're going to present on it. As a woodworker, you're kind of stuck in your shop listening to the buzz of the machines. And what I wanted to do was connect and say, come on, build your own board with me. So when we go into the forest, I want to teach reverence. I want people to grab the soil. I want them to feel how moist the soil is and smell it. I want them to look up, and I want them to see the color in the trees and all those branches suspended in air. The wonder of trees, the wonder of the forest, and that whole ecosystem that dwells within the forest, from the animals to the fungi at our feet. So when people come back into the shop, I hope they're inspired from their time in the forest, seeing all the nooks and crannies of the trees. And my goal is to channel that creativity into the piece of wood that they have in front of them. The first thing they're going to do is they're going to draw their board, and then they're going to continue to shape it. They're going to use the hand tools, my grandfather's hand tools, to craft their live edge. For me, there's something about the raw steel, the crunching of the fibers of the wood under that blade, and I hope they feel that same connection as I do. I hope people leave with an appreciation for wood, for the forest, for the food of my local region. Tree to Table is not just about building a board. It's a shared experience.
So I hope that gives you a little bit of a feeling of how a person who would not normally consider himself to be in tourism has created something that's magical, which is basically a combination of his passion and his skill. But he's created an experience that people take away, a board, a real board. And I have one in my kitchen, just so you know.
And I was just going to say, I'm going to have to go out there and do that because I have eaten off a lot of charcuterie boards, and I'm the daughter of a woodworker, but I have never, that would be amazing. And then that's one of the things that's interesting to me about some of these experiences, is that then you have something you take back to your regular life and incorporate it. And you must think about that all the time. Whenever you pull that board out, you must think about that experience that you had.
Well, so here's the funny thing. When I pull that board down in my kitchen, I'm not talking about the board. I'm talking about Dave.
Right.
And I'm talking about what we did with Dave. And that's what's really important. All of a sudden, marketing shifts from, instead of spending all this money on marketing to push stuff out there, all of the people that made a board become his advocates.
Right. Oh, that's great. I love that.
When you go see Dave, you tell him that you and I first connected right here.
I will. So this leads well into another question I had, which was about how this type of experiential travel benefits communities and how it benefits travelers, because I think we could see that right here, right as you were, telling us about how this works.
It's a really good question. How does this kind of tourism benefit communities? And I think that I'm going to give you several different things to think about. And each of us live in a very different area. Some of us live in urban areas, some of us live in rural areas. And so when we think about communities, we often think about, oh, communities in a rural area. Well, no, there's communities in Toronto, right? So there's all kinds of different ways of looking at this. The first thing that I think about is how we've been seduced to thinking that tourism only occurs between May and October. And that somehow November to April means we go away. And I've always been puzzled by that. I'm an inbound operator, which means that my experiences and what we do is really about bringing people to where I live, not pushing people to other places. And I understand the appeal of going to other places. It's wonderful. But I don't think we've reached anywhere close to the range of experiences that are possible in Canada, this huge country, with the culture and the nature and the cuisine and the opportunities for intersecting with stories that are across this incredible geography. So the first thing I would say about communities is that we have an opportunity. I say something to myself just as a reminder. How about delivering experiences for the right people in the right season for the right reasons to do the right thing? So that immediately shifts our thinking. Oh, so tourism can occur and these experiences can occur all over Nova Scotia or all over Quebec or all over Ontario. Yes. And that leads to one of the most important things that is important in my view about coming from a climate change perspective and an over tourism perspective is, how do we disperse tourism over a larger area, tourism activities, tourism experiences, and the distribution of people so that we're not predicating tourism on large numbers of people. Yes, we need those attractions. Yes, we need those places where we can handle large volumes. But I think we have some other undiscovered, undeveloped opportunities to take people to places that reflect community traditions. And so we know these things right from our grandmother, right? Food is prepared in a particular kind of way, or raspberry pie is made in a particular kind of way. Or if you go to Dauphin, Manitoba, you'll eat pierogies, right? Except you can't find pierogies in Dauphin. So what do? So you work with the babas, and you work with the babas to create an experience that becomes accessible to the group market. How does that benefit the community of Dauphin? Well, the experience takes place in the church. They get $10,000 a year from this experience. Well, $10,000 a year to a church goes a long way. And that's what happens in rural communities, is that a small amount of increased revenue in the non-summer time period actually goes a long way in rural communities. So there is additional income, there's incremental income that occurs, and it's unexpected. I've been working with a farmer north of Edmonton, Prairie Gardens. And if any of your viewers live in Alberta or Saskatchewan and want to travel to meet an incredible woman, they created a new long table dinner experience for the group market that takes place between November and March at 30 below. Where do you go? In the greenhouse. The greenhouse becomes the setting for dinner. So I think we have to look at our communities and say, where are the venues in the community where we don't have to build anything, but it reflects what the community character already represents. And that enables us to maximize community infrastructure. And that allows our visitors to go to places in the community that they didn't think of going in the wintertime, and making that accessible. I think that when we disperse people like that to different areas, all of a sudden, rural communities start to say, hey, this province is thinking about the whole province, not just about the city of Halifax or just the city of Toronto, where large numbers of people come, because that's how the transportation system is set up. That's how our mechanism of dispersal takes place. The benefits to visitors are that they get to experience things that are a little bit off the beaten track. You go to Tillsonburg, Ontario, that used to be tobacco country. So you're going to be traveling through an area that today is quite different from 50 years ago. I mean, you're going through some really lovely agricultural countryside. I think that there's a yearning now as a result of what we've been learning about through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, and the responsibilities we have individually to address reconciliation, to say, well, where could we go to access an Indigenous experience or a Métis experience, and learn a little bit about this history of this country that I never learned in school. And maybe I can take on some responsibilities associated with that when I travel. But if I don't know what I should know, then how do I find out about that? And by the way, are there some experiences that could take me to experience a sweat, or learn a little bit about treaty, or learn a little bit about the things that are important for different Indigenous groups across the country? So I think you've got benefits to the community. You've also got benefits to visitors through these experiences. And I think the last thing I'll leave you with in terms of why experiences have value to visitors who travel to these communities is, I think it's less exploitive, meaning that we have an opportunity when we create experiences to ask our guests to behave appropriately. And you're probably aware, and some of your guests and some of your members here may be aware of the emergence of what are called visitor pledges. This is growing across the world, where nations and regions and destinations are saying, we'd like you to know what's here and what your responsibility is when you come here. That's an interesting maturation of tourism, where we are starting to say to people, it's not just about large numbers of people going through here. When you come here, we want you to know we welcome you. These are some things that you can do to behave responsibly when you're here. So those are some thoughts that come to mind for me when I think about how this kind of travel, transformative, is beneficial both to communities. The other thing I'll mention, I think at the community level, many people in rural communities don't think of themselves as being part of tourism. In fact, they're resistant to it. Oh no, we're going to get large numbers of people in tour buses. And the place where I live here is a good example. I live in the Gaspereau Valley, which is small farm country, which used to be orchards. But on these roads, on weekends, Halifax empties out. And we've got double-decker buses going to the wineries. We've got cyclists in pods on farm roads that are very narrow, have no shoulders. And BMWs are traveling side by side with people who live here and farm machinery. We better do some thinking about how to plan the receiving of visitors that our destination marketing agencies are saying, hey, come to the wineries. Well, both things have to work together.
That's really interesting. You know, this idea of the of telling people how to behave appropriately is really interesting because it, you know, especially in light of, you know, issues around over tourism and that sort of thing, but also because sometimes you just don't know, right? I mean, I might not know, I might be walking into a culture that's very unfamiliar to me and might inadvertently, you know, do something, behave in a way that is not appropriate. So I think I would actually appreciate that sort of guidance.
I'm curious. Catherine says she knows Tam Anderson at Prairie Gardens well. Where's Catherine?
Well, Catherine is in Alberta, I think.
Ah, well, that's interesting.
Edmonton, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And so Tam's farm is 45 minutes north of Edmonton. That's great. What a nice connection. Well, if you know Tam well, then you say hi from Celes. I just spoke to her a week ago. Very cool.
Janice, did you have a question?
Well, I a little bit, a little bit of a question. I remember things like going to a lobster supper in PEI at a church, in a church basement. And I was in Saskatoon one time, and there was a rodeo nearby in a small town, and joined them for a pancake breakfast. But they were just, you know, coincidental, and they were wonderful experiences because you rub elbows, you're, you know, with other people, and as you're eating the supper or the breakfast, right? But they were just by chance that I found out about them. And I'm just wondering, I see that Indigenous tourism is doing some, you know, has really gotten organized so that you can find things. But some of these smaller ones in the communities, do you go to the county or tourist site, or like, how does one find out about these?
That is the $1 million question, right? So part of what you're talking about is the difference between the serendipitousness of going to a place and going, oh, cool, I just met a cowboy. He said, come to the rodeo. Very cool. And we should make sure that continues to happen. I think what I'm talking about is and I'm losing track of your question. So just ask your question again.
Just how does one source these things?
Right.
Like, how does, because, you know, they are magical experiences when they're sometimes when they're not just for the tourist.
Mm-hmm.
Those experiences that are for the locals and the tourists.
Right. So
fun.
I think about myself in terms of, well, how would I access that, right? And sort of, you know, and I've traveled to Peru, I've traveled to some island nations. How does one do that? And I think that it depends on how extrovert or introvert you are to some extent, and who you travel with. And so maybe what you do is you get your travel mate to ask some questions when you're in the restaurant or getting some street food or some things like that. Where would you recommend going to do something?
These are solo travelers that we're talking to here.
Okay.
So yeah, it's yeah. But I guess there's usually a tourist office.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that the tourist office always knows the answer to this.
Oh, interesting.
What you're talking about is something different. You're talking about going down the back lane, right? Where Rick Mercer used to go in that alley to that graffiti, right? And that's what I'd like to do. So how does one find out about the lane that has graffiti, right? And so part of what we need to do is to become a little bit more schooled about the things. So where would I search? Airbnb. Why? Because Airbnb figured out 3 years ago, when they launched Airbnb experiences, that people, when they stay in accommodation, are not traveling to a place to stay in that place. They're traveling to use that place as an anchor to do things in the neighborhood. They figured that out. And so I would just canvas Airbnb as an inventory, right? Simple thing to do. Simple thing to do. And from there, you begin to become aware of the maps of Toronto or Calgary or Vancouver and the things that are happening, and neighborhoods begin to pop up because the storyteller or the host the Airbnb has at that particular location says, come to Stanley Park and I'll take photographs of you at sunset. Oh, never been to Stanley Park. Where's Stanley Park? You know, if you're not from Vancouver, and you're visiting Vancouver for the first time, it's iconic. It's a place to go, and the seawall is there, and the water is there, and there's this magic, right? And of this thing that we've heard about for years of Vancouver being a beautiful city to go and visit or to live or whatever. So I think different people are going to search differently, and I think my wife is probably a better searcher online than I am. So if the two of us were to go traveling, I probably wouldn't do a whole lot. I'd be more serendipitous, unless one year I went to Victoria, BC, and I happened to be there for a conference. And I asked myself, so I'm there for a conference, what else can I do while I'm in Victoria? And can I stay longer? And I went to Airbnb, and up popped an oyster shucking experience. And I live on the East Coast, and I had not yet learned to shuck oysters well. So I went. It was wonderful. I came away with an oyster knife, and now I shuck oysters. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, sometimes it is serendipitous, but at other times you can dig into a community, and certainly the Airbnb tip is a good one. I'd forgotten about Airbnb experiences. That's a good one.
I go back to it all the time. There are so many hosts that are wanting to be there, so much so that Airbnb during COVID actually had to stop both online experiences as well as the uptake of registering new experiences, because it was becoming really lucrative for them, and the explosion globally of people doing very cool things. And it's full of ideas. That's the other thing, right? You may not, when you're searching Airbnb and you may be going to this destination, but somehow in your search up comes this place that makes hats, and you get to go make a hat. It's like, it causes you to think differently about the place that you're going to visit.
It's interesting. One of my last pre-pandemic trips was in Italy, and just by coincidentally, I don't know how I ended up looking on Airbnb, because I don't think I realized this at the time, but there were several opportunities there where you could go to what looked like an Italian grandmother, to go to her kitchen and learn to make, whatever the dish was that was her specialty. So yeah, that's interesting.
Speaking of which, let me just share an Italian company that has been doing this for 12 years. This is Vumago, interactive experiential travel. They've been doing this for 12 years already.
Huh.
And where are they based?
I don't know the answer to that.
We will find out.
But now you know, Vumago.
Wow, never heard of them.
And their philosophy and their story is fantastic, and I love it. So if you go to Antimo's story, he will tell you why Vumago. He will tell you why he's a facilitator. He gives you a testimonial. He gives you insight. Create a customized vacation. Be more involved in your vacation. Get the lowdown on what locals eat. Get to know an area in a private and relaxed way. It's a safety net, and be accompanied by a passionate Italian. So putting it right out there in terms of what they provide. And I think we don't do a good job at that. We don't. We think that if we offer the package, the package should give you all the information that you need, but we're not connected to real people. Right.
It's interesting. I made a note to go back to, I heard you say something that I wasn't familiar with, although as soon as you said the word, I had an idea what you were talking about. You mentioned something about experience washing. Is that what you said? I'm guessing that's something like greenwashing. Could you?
It's analogous to it, right? And it's something I wanted to address a little bit somewhere in our conversation. So let's do it right now. So if you go to certain websites, they have changed their language on their website. So language is really important, because in order to travel for experiences, you have to be aware of how language can be tricky. And so if you had gone to their website, let's say 5 years ago, all of these things would have been on their website: hiking, bicycling, horseback riding, paddling, mountaineering, caving, all those things. So one of the tricks to being able to recognize the difference between a company that truly offers experiences as opposed to a company that maybe is greenwashing or experience washing is that activities are different from experiences, and an activity usually ends in ing.
Ah,
So you're going kayaking, and my question would be, well, what's the experience? Oh, well, we're going kayaking. No, that's not an experience. Who's the guide? What are you making? Not what are you just doing by traveling? What are you making? What makes it local and authentic? What food are you eating that makes it local? And what's the story there anyway? Or is it just a guide using a kayak as the basis for communicating knowledge instead of being on a bus? Right? So that's one tip that I would certainly say is when you're on that website, start to look. Mountaineering. Okay, so is it technical mountaineering? Okay, but that's not an experience. An experience, and I'm going right off the top of my head here, if it was a mountaineering experience, I would go to a place like Canmore, Alberta, where a man who did caving for years changed his whole approach. And this is the caves just outside of Canmore. And he changed and he began creating caving experiences for the novice, not for the expert. It included music concerts down in the cave with musicians. We're thinking different here. These are the stages that occur in our communities, right? But we haven't thought about it in a creative way, in a thoughtful way, in a different way. And I think that we are at a point in time, because of social media, because of all of the things that we could do, that's part of the language when we talk about bucket list and things like that. And then somebody throws a curve like that and says, would you like to go for a concert down inside a cave? Holy smokes, now I have to get over my fear of crawling through that cave. But the prize is at the end, we get to sing together in a chorus.
wow.
That's how we have to start thinking about Canada. We've been doing tourism in a very lazy way.
Interesting. Okay. There's a lot of food for thought here.
Catherine's sending lots of stuff to us. Should we be talking about what Catherine is sending to us?
Yes, let's see what Catherine has to say.
Prairie Gardens is what I referred to in Bonnecourt. That's correct. And yes, I know Karen very well. And I've been coaching Karen in the past, and her company, Alberta Food Tours, that's a good example. Alberta Food Tours is a really good example of an experiential tourism company that occurs in Edmonton, Calgary, and Banff. Urban experiences, culinary, the Canadian food experience. And she's done a darn good job at that. She's a wonderful person. And it's not only she's done a good job on the experiences, she's built a community of guides and storytellers who are good at that. And that's the capacity building that we have to do in our country in order to do this. Catherine says, what came to mind for finding these opportunities just became confirmed. The founder of Vumago, I have toured virtually with them on Hagel. This is great. This is great.
Huh. Wow, Catherine, you've got this stuff all figured out.
You have a good following.
I'd be interested to know how it went with Hagel. How that experience felt like an experience of travel, given that it was virtual.
Have any of you taken virtual experiences? I have a number. They're incredible.
Yeah.
They are incredible. The first experience that I took online was with an Italian in his home in Venice, teaching us how to make pasta. And of all things, the 8 people that were online, this is almost a year ago, the 8 people of us that were online, 6 of us were from Canada. 4 of them were from Saskatchewan, but they were in different locations and they were all family, sort of extended family. And virtual experiences are really, really interesting, really interesting.
Huh. We had someone contacted us a couple years ago who was starting up. It was like having a virtual coffee date with someone, and he was starting this. He was in Armenia, and he wanted people around the world to see what does a coffee break look like for you in your home or in your city, and what are, let's have a conversation as though I was there and you were telling me about your life and where you live. And I thought it was such an interesting idea. And I don't think it took off. I think that I'm not sure what happened with it. But it's too bad, because the timing, if it had been in the last year or so, it probably would have really.
Well, Airbnb pivoted really well. Airbnb did an incredible job. They lost all their revenue from experiences, and they went right into virtual experiences. And if you go online and see their virtual experiences, I took one with a woman who is from Lisbon, Portugal. And here's what she did. She had been, her grandmother had sent her, so she'd gone away to university for a year, and her grandmother had sent her postcards. So what she did is she took all of those postcards from 8 or 10 years ago, then went back to those same places and photographed it. And then the virtual experience was her stories about her grandmother from the same location years apart. And I learned about Lisbon in the process.
Wow.
And when I came out of that, it was really hard for me, because I think the experience took place at night simply because of time zones. And I went back into the house and I said to my wife, I don't know where I am right now. That's how well done the experience was.
Wow.
So I think we've got lots of opportunities to experience. So these virtual experiences, by the way, you do make something. These people aren't just talking to you. They're telling you what you should have ready. Cocktail mixing with a drag queen from Portugal. How cool is that?
That's very cool.
It's an award-winning program.
Huh. Wow. I feel like I could talk to you for days.
This is my world.
So I don't want us to run out of time I want us to save some time at the end so that you can tell us about new things you're working on. But just before we get to that, we have a pretty large readership, and every year we do a survey and ask them about, what's important to them and what they're thinking about, going forward in travel. And on our most recent one, a large percentage of people said that they wanted to travel more sustainably going forward. And I wonder if you could just give us a couple of tips for ways that we can do that.
Sure. And I think my first immediate response to you would be to say, we have to do it first for ourselves. If we're going to travel sustainably, it's not something that should occur because we're traveling. It's something that hopefully aligns with our values. And so I would say that as a consumer, I would invite all of us to practice procurement of food and things that we buy as gifts as much locally as we can. If we have that habit, then as a traveler, when we go somewhere, that's what we tend to do, is we look for local food, whatever local food is, in whatever country that we go to, or the things that we decide that we're going to purchase to bring back home likely will reflect something that is handmade by somebody from the country that we've gone to. We've just had something interesting happen here in Nova Scotia with the new government that got elected about a month ago. The mandate letter for the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, he has been instructed within 90 days to have a new plan in place to support and encourage local food consumption in Nova Scotia, with the goal of 20% of the money spent on food by Nova Scotians being spent on locally produced food. That's incredible. When you think of this as a political mandate, that starts to change everything then from a trickle-down perspective, right? In terms of what restaurants do, in terms of what schools do, in terms of procurement policies, and that affects travel. So that's a really interesting evolution. I don't know where that came from, but I'm super impressed at this particular point in time that that's happened. I think we can investigate lower carbon footprint methods of travel. I think that when we get to a destination, can we increase the number of activities that don't require use of carbon emission vehicles? Can we walk more? It's that simple. So for downtown Toronto, why can't we walk more? Why can't we use public transport, right? Don't hire a taxi. Actually go on public transport, because public transport in Toronto is really good, right? It's taking advantage of some of that. One of the things I do, and I travel about pre-COVID, 60 to 80 days a year, I take a travel kit with me that has rewashable cutlery, nested plastic bowls that I can rewash in my hotel room, and my own straws that I wash out. So I am really dropping the requirement for any fast food or anything where I take out, unless somebody pushes really hard on me and says, our health requirements say that you cannot put our food into your container, and I'll push back if that's the case. And I think we have to learn to do that. This may be common for your viewers, but just get away from plastic, disposable, anything. We shouldn't be doing it, right? And so that's another thought that I have. I'll throw an idea out in terms of anybody who's interested in terms of purchasing carbon offsets. When you purchase a carbon offset, the whole idea is that you are trying to offset the amount of carbon that is released as a result of the transportation that you are taking and getting to a destination. And carbon offsets are meant to say, well, let's convert that amount, those tons of carbon, into a dollar figure that goes to plant trees somewhere. So what I'm doing now is that when I travel, I always purchase, in quotation marks, carbon offsets, but I don't actually go to a carbon offset company to give them the money to do that, because usually the projects are in another country somewhere else in the world. I want to do it here in Canada. And so what I've decided to do, and have been doing for about 3 years, is that I use a carbon calculator to actually calculate the tonnage of carbon in my travel, whether it's train, plane, car. You put it all together, you come up with the amount of carbon emitted, and then I go to from a carbon calculator, I calculate the amount of dollars it is equivalent to. So let's say it's $32 is going to be my total sort of carbon offset fee that I could pay to have trees planted somewhere else. So instead, I go to the Nature Trust in Nova Scotia and I give them $50 to protect habitat that is already in place from destruction. Keep the biodiversity that we have in place. And so I think we have to start thinking smarter, right? And care about the places that are in our backyard, or give that money to an agency that is restoring something that has been harmed, a marsh or something else, right? That needs that help, that needs that support. I think just from a travel planning perspective, stay longer. If you're going to go, say, for 2 weeks, stay longer in a particular place. Use less transport to get. Stay there for 3 or 4 days. There's less transportation involved. You're spending money in the local community. It's actually helping people. So sustainability is not just about reducing your carbon footprint. It's about also helping local people to thrive, right? And be able to do that. Look for smaller accommodations that serve local food. That's why Airbnb works. That's why B&Bs work, right? I think the hotels have a huge opportunity if they could only convert on that and figure out some new ways. Some are. I think the Fairmont chain is doing a good job in trying to do that in a small way, whether it's, you know, producing honey on the rooftops of some of their hotels from local bees and using that as part of the menu. But we have a long way to go in terms of how we can convert on some of that. And what your company does, which is traveling in smaller groups or solo. Right? Those are all part of it. We're on a continuum. We are changing, and we're going to have to continue to change. The challenge is that we have a limited time window in terms of our carbon budget for the planet. And so if all of us as travelers can be doing this, Dr. Scott from the University of Waterloo put a figure in front of my face many years ago that I've never forgotten. If travel was a nation, it has the 5th largest carbon footprint of any nation in the world.
Wow.
We have a responsibility, because you can see that the curve pre-COVID was that travel and tourism was going sky high. And none of us were caring about that. Nobody talked about, until Greta Thunberg did, that we have a carbon budget for the planet and it's finite.
Okay, well, I hope that, I mean, certainly there's been a lot of studies of travelers showing that people feel more committed to being more responsible travelers now post-COVID. So here's hoping we hold to that that desire. And thank you. Those are some really good tips for us to. And I really like the idea of figuring out, calculating what the carbon offset would be, and then investing that in an organization that's already worked, because then you know exactly where the money's going and how it's being spent, as opposed to going online and putting in your credit card number and hoping for the best.
And the cynical side of us would say, is it really going where it's supposed to go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, now is the time to ask them, because we're almost out of time. And while I give you a chance to pop any questions in there that you might have, Celeste, maybe you could tell us a bit about any exciting new initiatives that you're working on.
Well, there's two or three that I find that I'm really interested in. The first one is when we moved from Nova Scotia to Nova Scotia from Manitoba 3 years ago. So you can imagine when you're sort of at a mature stage of your life, moving to a new community that you know nothing about, that to try to continue a 22-year-old tourism company requires some transition time. So part of what I've had to do is get to know the community, get to know who are the storytellers in the community. And one of the storytellers that I have found that has come out, and we are planning a new experience, is a clinical herbalist. And she knows her plants incredibly. So the experience that we're creating is called On Being with Plants, an Acadian forest and field wild foraging excursion. So we're going to be going into the forest. I've been taking courses at Acadia. It's really nice to have a university in your backyard, learning about the flora of Nova Scotia, the Acadian forest, and how to manage forestry. We have 85 acres here that we are stewarding. So we'll go into the forest and we'll look for wild medicines. And I'm learning from a really lovely way of Indigenous viewing of care for the environment called two-eyed seeing, which has been initiated here by a Mi'kmaq elder by the name of Albert, Marshall, Albert Marshall from Eskasoni in Cape Breton, south side of Cape Breton. And so we're creating that as a way for people to forage, to learn what to forage for. But here's the thing that makes it experiential. So not only are they picking and harvesting and learning and feeling and tasting and smelling, we're then going to go back to the community hall, which is right beside our place here, and they're going to make herbal preparations to take home. They could be salves, they could be balms, they could be lotions. And so it's that conversion of knowledge to practice that is at the heart of the experience. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on. We've got a number of other irons in the fire, and I'm coaching new experiences that are being birthed all across this country. And I would love to show you one that is a Métis experience that just launched. The video just launched today, if you've got time for that.
I can't imagine anybody would not want to see that.
Let me just do that. So this is a marvelous woman who lives about, half hour, 35 minutes east of Winnipeg. Her name is Melanie Gamache. She is Métis, and she's just launched a new experience. And Travel Manitoba. What's interesting about this is that here is the destination marketing organization. To your question, Janice, and to your question, well, who is out there sharing what's going on? This just launched from Travel Manitoba today. So it's nice to see this in terms of the destination marketing agency for the province saying, hey, come see this.
Every bead is touched. When you're looking at a piece of beadwork that has countless numbers of beads, you know for sure that every single one of those beads has been touched by the creator. The more that I got into beading, the more I found that there was so much more of a story to be told behind these pieces. for me, trying to make sure that the beadwork art doesn't die, but the stories that go along with the beadwork need to be attached to it. And because everything was so suppressed for so long, beadwork is an art that was almost lost. Now that there's a resurgence in beading and the Indigenous culture, and in my case, the Métis culture, I think it's important to understand the full history of it, that you can't move ahead if you don't know who you are. In order to find out who you are, you need to really look inside yourself. I like to share the Métis culture and history through beadwork. And what that means is basically, I want to share the stories that are told through beadwork. I take them out on a yard scouting tour and I identify and kind of talk about some of the primary vegetation that was historically used native to Manitoba with the Métis in regards to medicinal and technical uses. After that, they'll come into the sunroom and we'll work on one of the two activities depending on the program that they chose. One is developing a pattern. The other program that I work on is the beading program. They will learn and understand how to do 2 needle beading. This is to give you practice, this pattern. It's loosely based off of the 5-petal flower that the Métis traditionally bead. And so they'll create their own very little piece of beadwork history. And then after that, we'll go outside and we'll be able to enjoy the Métis charcuterie board that I have prepared for them. We can talk about maybe what they're taking away from the day. And hopefully people will leave with more awareness about beading and the Métis culture.
I want to do that too.
Isn't it interesting, right? If we start to, so this is where sort of my closing comment on this is that I think we got marketing and tourism backwards. We've been marketing stuff. What we need to do is develop the experiences first that have a story. When we get the story right, now we can market and the storytelling changes because it's not about selling stuff. It's about a relationship.
Right. Celes, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This has given me so much to think about, and as if I wasn't itching already to travel. Now I want to travel in a different way, maybe. And so this has been really wonderful. Thank you.